Hey, it's Amelia Baker, and today I'm going to be doing a book review on women in sports and also the Dust Bowl girls. So the first book I'm going to be talking about today is Women in Sports. It tells the story of 50 different female athletes in over 40 different sports, dating back from the 18,000s into today. It's a really pretty book. It has a photo on each side and then their story with little tidbits on the side, as well as infographics throughout about muscle anatomy, timeline of women's participation in sports, influential teams, statistics, things like that, which was really interesting to see. I loved how the author put this book in chronological order, so you can really see how women's sports evolved over time and the challenges women faced within each time period, as well as all of the research she's done to make a comprehensive biography for each athlete. There were so many interesting stories throughout this book. One that really stood out to me was this polo player who would dress up as a guy at the games in order to fool the refs. And it was actually her father's idea for her to dress up as a guy, and all of her teammates knew she was a girl as well and that she was doing this, which I was pretty surprised about. But then there was also some tougher stories about athletes battling racial inequalities, stereotypes, prejudice, and none of the stories in this book, none of the women had it easy. I'd highly recommend this book. However, I think it'd be great for a younger audience, or maybe parents reading it to their kids or teachers having it in the classroom, because more often than not you hear in the media of these great male athletes and that are role models to kids, but you don't really hear of many female athletes being role models. So I think this book really highlights the women's stories. It would be a great example to young girls or young kids that they're able to do just as much as the guys can and are able to break these records, and maybe it would make it so where more girls stay in sports longer. This author also has two other books in this series called Women in Science and Women in Art that I would highly recommend as well if you liked this book. And the next book I'm going to be talking about today is called The Dust Bowl Girls, which tells the story of Coach Babb and a group of young women who were the national championship squad in the Oklahoma Presbyterian College during the Great Depression. These girls would go on to win 89 consecutive games, as well as 2 national titles, the American Championship and the World Championship. The story mainly follows Doll Lucille and Coach Babb, and Coach Babb was actually the author's great uncle, so it really showed that this was a personal story to her. And one thing that I found really interesting about this book was there's photos from their family's personal collection. So one, it had a great closeness and connection to the author, as well as it was really cool to see all these old photos from back then. It reads more as a fictional book rather than a non-fictional book, which can be really nice. Sometimes biographies get a little slow, but this definitely wasn't it. This was a fast read. And it was really interesting to hear about people's opinions about women playing basketball in this time period. There was this one story where these men thought that women wouldn't be able to have kids if they played basketball because there would be too much running and jumping that would just mess with their body too much and they wouldn't be able to reproduce, which is just an insane theory, but it was really interesting to see and read about. Not only was this a really interesting read because you got to hear about these women's challenges and what they faced in order to play their sport in college, but it also took place during the Great Depression, which is such a pivotal time period in America and was such a hard time for people. So to hear these personal stories about everything that they were going through during the Great Depression, as well as facing all of these prejudice as women playing their sport, it really was cool to see this story. Even though I loved this book and loved hearing the story, I don't know if I necessarily would read it again, just because it is a nonfiction book, and I feel like once you read it once, you'll know the story, and I don't know if you necessarily would pick it up again. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I would definitely recommend reading it, just maybe not picking it up again. However, if you like learning about sports in that time period and women's involvement in sports, especially back then I would highly recommend this. And like I said, it was really interesting to hear about the combination of sports during the Great Depression.